this episode, I am speaking with Steph Silver, who is the author of the book Anywhere, USA, a Memoir. This will be a bit of a different kind of episode. I've known Steph for many years, and I had no idea she had an upbringing with an incredible amount of upheaval. I want you to hear a bit of the story from the book, the process of writing her memoir, and what she got out of the book from a personal growth perspective. Cue the music.
Welcome to the Repurpose Your Career podcast, brought to you by Career Pivot. This podcast is where those of us in the second half of life come together to discuss how to repurpose our careers for the 21st century. Come listen to career experts give you proven strategies. Listen to people like you tell their stories on how they repurpose their careers. And finally, get your questions answered. Your host, Mark Miller, has made 6 career pivots over the last 30 years. He understands this is not about jumping out of the frying pan into a fire, but rather to create a plan where you make clear, actionable steps or pivots to a better future career. Are you ready to repurpose your career?
Welcome to episode 336 of the Repurpose Your Career podcast. My name is Mark Miller, and I'll be your host every Monday for discussion on what it's like to repurpose your career. In this episode, I am speaking with Steph Silver, who is the author of the book Anywhere, USA, a Memoir. This will be a bit of a different kind of episode. I've known Steph for many years, and I had no idea she had an upbringing with an incredible amount of upheaval. I want you to hear a bit of the story from the book, the process of writing her memoir, and what she got out of the book from a personal growth perspective. Let me read Steph's bio. Steph savors the little things wherever she goes, little flowers in a field, sunlight through the trees, or the sounds of laughter. Moving over 30 times before she was 17, traversing between campgrounds, fully furnished homes, and homeless shelters, Steph used her optimism and grit to rise to a place of comfort, peace, and personal success. She is now on a mission to enhance as many lives as possible to help humans thrive. Her first book, Anywhere USA, is a memoir that reveals some dark sides of a turbulent childhood while shining light and optimism at every turn. Despite close calls with disasters, both natural and man-made, Steph believes that she is good enough, strong enough, or works hard enough. One day she'll become worthy of the love and security she seeks. Who she ultimately chooses to become, and if she'll transcend her circumstances, are questions Steph must answer for herself more than once in this gripping coming-of-age story. Steph founded Vine Collective in 2018 after parting from a branding agency she's helped grow over 12 years. Through individual and team coaching, retreats, public speaking, and brand work, Vine cultivates meaningful and memorable experiences that bring forth the most exceptional versions of each person and or their brand. Steph also uses her desire for human connection, authentic experiences, profound growth to train, educate, and amplify leaders and businesses who live through their mission, vision, passion as a host of MVP Business Podcast. She's deeply driven to build relationships and help people authentically grow, succeed, and connect. When she's not managing her team, visiting with clients, or connecting with friends, Steph can usually be found cooking, gardening, dancing, or mountain biking with her 2 sons. This episode is sponsored by the Career Pivot community, but more on that later. After listening to this episode, I want you to think about your friends and colleagues and how well do you really know them. I have known Steph for over 10 years, and she is a really together person. But after I read her book, I went, how did she survive her childhood to become the person she is today? Many of us have difficult childhoods, and not everyone is here today. But people like Steph can be an inspiration for all of us. Now, on to my discussion with Steph Silver. Welcome to the Repurpose Your Career podcast. I have the real joy of having my dear friend Steph Silver on the podcast, and she is the author of Anywhere, USA, a memoir. Welcome to the podcast.
Thank you so much, Mark. I'm so happy to see you.
I probably met Steph 10, 12, 15 years ago at where?
Metropolitan Breakfast Club in Austin, Texas.
When Steph was looking for early readers for a book, I said, it's more your memoir. I had no idea you had a childhood growing up that you did.
Yeah, nobody does. And that's part of the reason or part of what makes it so interesting for people who know me to read, and why it makes sense to go as far with it as I did. Because sometimes you learn about a very interesting upbringing, but you don't really know what happens next. And so this is a pretty complete story.
I don't want to dig in too much into your story, but you lived in a lot of places growing up.
Yes, sir.
So tell us about that journey.
Well, it all started in Sapulpa, Oklahoma. I really just like saying that word. And then when I was about 2, some crazy stuff happened and went on to Oregon. But from there, it was back to Oklahoma and over to California. And I ended up living more than 30 places before I graduated from high school at the age of 17.
Both your parents are alcoholics?
Yes, sir. And everybody thought that my parents were in the military, and they still do. You know, when people say, "Where are you from?" I'm like, "Oh, I don't know how to answer that question." And they say, "Oh, were your parents in the military?" And I said, "No, not at all. They're just restless." I used to say they were crazy, and that is probably true. but I think that I've settled on the concept really that they were just restless and always ready for a new adventure.
Yeah, it's interesting because I grew up in the same house for 18 years. And as long as I could remember, I went off to college and my parents finally sold the house. So to read your story and to hear the chaos, to read about the chaos. And Steph, you're a pretty normal person.
It appears so from the outside.
Well, and like we were talking before, right before we got on the call, a lot of times, our world is what as we grow up in it, we don't know what the rest of the world looks like. Mm-hmm. So tell us what you were telling me about looking through the windows.
Yeah. When I was younger, I realized that I always wanted to look through other people's windows to see what their lives were like, because I had an idea that my life was not the standard. We were blessed with growing up with, after school programs and television. So there was that little glimpse into the possibility of what other people's lives might look like outside of your family. Because before television, we really had no idea other than our friends and family. And a lot of times they were just like ourselves. But because I moved so much and I met, thousands of people at an early age, I had an idea that maybe they weren't quite like me and our families weren't the same. So I always wanted to look into their windows and see. And my thought was that everybody sat down for dinner together and had, donuts on Sunday mornings and hugged and kissed each other before they went to bed. And then I realized when I went to college that my life was very, very different from anyone else's. But I also started to realize that even when a family looked like they had it all together, everybody has their own stuff and baggage and traumas and things to be upset about.
Yep. And that's where, the book, you go all the way from your early childhood all the way to today, pretty much, and going through the deaths of both your parents, which obviously that's one thing we both have in common. My mother was very old when I was born. She was almost 40. So I reverse parented my mother in my late 30s when all my friends were going, oh, that's my grandma.
Right. And you didn't have to, most people don't have to nurse their grandparents.
Yeah.
That is up to their parents to do. And it usually happens later. But yeah, my memoir covers 2 to 42. So I'm still pretty young when it comes to trying to identify with other people who have lost both parents already.
Yep.
So yeah, that's been interesting. So I still have young children who, don't have grandparents on my side, all that kind of stuff.
What got you to write the memoir? Because a lot of people who listen to this podcast probably have thought about writing the memoir.
Well, it started off like once you read it, it's funny. It was my life. I wrote it. I read it at least 4 or 5 times through the editing process, and I still read it with, oh my gosh, what's going to happen next? Because there's so much that just like, there's another arc, another change. What else is going to happen? So I knew as a kid that people don't move that much and that we were on a crazy adventure. When I started college, the first time that I knew that it was really different and that my perspective was kind of off was when I was talking to a boyfriend, and I told him a story, and he said, "That's not funny, Stephanie. Why are you laughing?" I was like, "What do you mean?" He said, "That's not funny. That's tragic." And I was like, "Oh, shoot. That's one of the funny stories." Oh, no. Let me take a look at this. What's happening? And then I realized as I was going through college that as I started seeing life from a whole new perspective, my ideas of my memories shifted. And so I went from, I had traveled this great adventure with my family, to being really, really mad at both of my parents, to then starting to understand their perspective and their journey that they were going through as people trying to live lives. And then I started my own life. I put myself through college and did all the things. And at some point I had a really great career. And I thought, man, I mean, I have a great career, but I realized like I have come so far. This is a story that would really benefit other people. It's not just entertaining. It's actually, I think, inspiring and intriguing, and helps to show that perspective is everything, that hard work can get you really far. And to just kind of see maybe either someone who has been through a similar life, because I've really gotten a lot of feedback from people who said that their lives were similar, or to show this like drastic other side of what happens in our country. I came to a point in my life where it seemed like it was a complete story, and something in me said, it's time to start writing.
This was for me, it was a very difficult read because I know you.
Yeah.
And to see people's, as you say, I would have never expected this because you're a pretty together person. That was, by the way, a compliment.
Thank you.
And the chaos and the moving and your parents drinking and the fact that, how did you get through, or I should say, how did you cope with school where you were constantly changing schools? Because most of us want continuity. We want consistency. And obviously you had that, I got the impression, with your brother and sister. What about the rest of your life?
Yeah. So changing schools when my brother and sister were there wasn't that hard. But my 8th grade year, I went to 5 different schools. And at that time, my brother and sister both moved out. And that was one of the hardest years of my life. It was probably the hardest year of my life up until that point. So I was 14 years old, something like that. And I was already used to shifting and changing to fit in. But it was hardest at first when it felt like I lost my brother and sister. But then it was, there's something about this human experience that once you start to deal with something, you kind of don't have a choice. So you just roll with it. And I think that's one of the benefits of having gone through what I did, especially as a child, because I've gone through a lot of changes here in the last couple of years, and it's a lot harder as an adult because you expect consistency. You expect something from yourself. And I have children, so I'm trying to create stability, the opposite of what I had as a child. I'm trying to create for my children. But one thing that I learned that year was the ability, and I kind of made it a little bit of a game, that every time I moved, I felt like I had an opportunity to remake myself. Like, who am I going to be at this new place? Who do I need to be at this new place? Do I need to be like in the book? You'll see, like, there was a time where I tried to be a skater, like the least skater girl you've ever known. But I tried to be a skater because I thought that's what was cool. I had to get tough. I had to get really tough at one point because it was a really a low income, tough school where I felt like I needed to fight. And that shift in mindset and ability to say, like, I'm going to stand up for myself now, I'm going to be tough, came in handy a couple times at that particular school. So I think that my alcoholic upbringing actually gave me the gift of being able to read a room quickly. A lot of people who grow up in alcoholic households or trauma-filled households will tell you that they can walk in and pick out where the danger zone is, who's the possible bear that's going to attack, and how to mitigate. So there's a lot that we learn in those circumstances that I see as a benefit now as an adult. I went to school for theater and then got out and went into sales and marketing. And honestly, I think it's all psychology, and it's the tools I learned as a child, adaptability, how to move into one room, read the room, and shift and change. And I think those are the skills that allowed me to move from one place to another. But I didn't realize how many people I had lost until I was probably 15, and I truly lost somebody. And it was at that point that I started to realize how often I just disappeared, because it wasn't just that we moved. My dad would literally say, pack your bags, we're leaving tomorrow. And we would take off in whatever car that we had. We would just, whatever we could fit in the car, we would take, and everything else we would leave behind, which is another phenomenal lesson to learn. We don't need all the crap we accumulate. When people's homes burn down or floods, or, we have climate change and all these things that are affecting a lot of different people. When your family and your pets survive, you're good.
Yeah.
That's all you need.
This episode is sponsored by the Career Pivot membership community. The Career Pivot membership community is a group of people from all over the U.S. and Canada with diverse backgrounds. This is a community where everyone is there to help everyone else out figure out what they want to do in the second half of life and then make it happen. Many have made changes that they did not know existed or was possible when they came to the community. They learn from each other and broaden their horizons on what was really possible. Let's hear what Russ said about being part of the community.
At first, I got a lot out of the community, just meeting new people and finding folks in my phase of life. And that was really encouraging. As I've been in it a longer time, I'm now realizing that I have a community that knows me. And this is people who know me in a new way. And that is something that I've really come to realize, that it's I don't really want to part with it. It's valuable in terms of support. It's also valuable in terms of accountability. And I find that, I always get questions asked to me. I also learn things. for example, the idea of pivoting to do some online appearances is an idea that came out of a career pivot. We had an evening where we talked about how to do that. I'm also teaching classes with something called Get Set Up, and a member of the Career Pivot community kind of recruited me to come teach classes with Get Set Up. So it was a good contact. I'm over 60 and heading toward the middle of that decade, and I find that we are a unique group. Some of us, like me, don't ever have plans on retiring. We just want to find work that we love for the rest of our life.
You can't just join the community. I bring people into the community every few months in groups. You can sign up for the waiting list, so when I open the door for new members, you'll be notified. If you're interested in learning more about the endeavor and sign up for the waiting list, please go to careerpivot.com/community. Now, back to the episode. Well, what that brings up for us is when we moved to Mexico, we didn't bring much with us. We brought no furniture. We made 2 or 3 trips and we brought as much as we could get in our Subaru Outback.
Yeah.
And people going, "But what'd you do with all your stuff?" I said, "I gave it away." When you decided to write the book, what was the process you took?
Well, a lot of people are shocked by the amount that I remember. And I realized recently that in order for your brain to form a solid long-term memory, like we remember everything, it's in there in our subconscious, but in order to have it on the recall, there has to be an emotion tied to it, a strong emotion, positive, negative. That's why smells are a part of your memory, because it helps to create that emotional connection. And so because there was so much that happened in my lifetime, in my childhood, we didn't live in the same house. We didn't have the same emotional experiences from day to day. So because of that, I was able to remember more than most people. I do not have a photogenic memory. It's just, I have an emotional memory, I think, more than most. So my first step was to write out a timeline of this year. I moved to this, I lived in this place, and these are the bullet points of what happened in that place. I started to write and I got stuck, and I started to say, okay, every Monday you have to write. And then that, like, the muse was not coming to me. And I'm like, okay, what if I write a candle or light a candle? What if I do this? What if I do that? And it really just wasn't working. And it paused for a few years, actually. And then I started a podcast about business, and I realized how easy it was for me to host a podcast. I also realized how easy it is and how much fun I have telling my stories. And so I have a friend who is a writer, and I said, what if we do this as a podcast? What if I talk to you and you ask me questions and I just tell my stories? And she said, I've never done it before, but okay, let's try it. So we did that. And at the same time, we dictated it so that we transcribed the recording. The recording turned out to not be great, but we have it in our toolbox for, I don't know, the made for TV movie that will possibly happen in the future. But what we did from there was I used the transcripts and I started to edit those down. And then I realized that was total crap and it wasn't going to work. So I just started writing. And my friend then went into editing mode. So I would write and then I would tell her how much I've completed. And it wasn't going quickly enough for me. So over Memorial Day weekend, I created for myself a writer's retreat. I said, if I were going to go to a writer's retreat, what would I expect? And then I held myself accountable as if I had paid $10,000, $20,000 for this writer's retreat. Here, Stephanie, don't waste this time. Steph Silver. You're here, Steph. Don't waste this time. Make it worth it. So I had everything scheduled in from I didn't make myself wake up until 10, but I always woke up before then, but I didn't have anything scheduled in before then, other than if I had extra time, I would go on a walk. I would have a, healthy breakfast that was balanced and high in protein. And then I had meditation, yoga, walks, swimming, all this stuff built in to where I would have movement, mental movement, but then dedicated time to write. And so I completed the first half of the book in about 4 or 5 months. And then I completed the second half in 3 days, personal retreat.
You obviously had, quote, a developmental editor. There are all kinds of editors. And then you're coming out on paperback and Kindle.
Yep. Kindle comes out September 5th. So it's 1 week from this recording. And then September 9th is paperback. And I will be starting to produce an Audible. I was going to produce it tomorrow, but my kids are homesick today. So who knows?
Obviously, I'm presuming writing this book was therapeutic.
Very much so. Like we've alluded to, there was a lot of... it wasn't just tumultuous, it was traumatic. It was fun and adventurous and all that kind of stuff, but a lot has happened in my little life. And as you mentioned, it included the deaths of my parents. It also includes, relationship problems and the beautiful, beautiful birth of my 2 kids. But I'd never really processed. I went to therapy twice. Both times lasted, the first time lasted 2 or 3 weeks. The second time lasted a couple of months. Actually, I went 3 times because then when my mom passed, I went again. But I always feel like there's so much. I don't want to start over again with a new therapist. Where do we start? What's the new drama that I've got to get over now? And going through this, I love telling my stories because they're so fascinating and interesting and fun. And like my editor says, she says, Steph tells these stories that are so traumatic as if she's talking about her favorite ice cream cone. I just laugh because they are just so wild of stories. I honestly thought that this book was going to be a comedy. I thought that it was going to be really funny. And I even got my brother and sister and I said, okay, tell me some stories that you remember. And I'm like, yeah, it's the same old stories. We remember the same stuff, but why do we laugh through it?
Yeah.
I'm like, well, we're covering up our trauma is a big part of it, but we have processed it. And the biggest thing that I have learned, I've been doing like my own growth out beyond writing the book, but going through it in a sequential process really opened my eyes to what happened and when. And I had like the whole concept of everything was perfect and then we left. Everything was perfect and then we left. And the repeating pattern of that, I didn't realize that I never got to like live in that peace. As soon as it was comfortable, my dad would, either throw down the hammer for real, or we would just leave it all behind. And so I was married for 22 years, just recently realized that my entire life had been lived in fight or flight, that I had no concept of inner peace, even in my sleep. That a lot of times when I had real panic attacks, they happened in my sleep because that was the only time I would allow myself to process anything, because I was in work mode too. I was always trying to prove, trying to grow, and I'm still trying to grow emotionally and spiritually and all the things. But I felt like I had to be ready for the bear to attack at any moment, the bear of life, and be ready to show that bear that I was strong, I was ready, I was worthy of love, and I was smart enough even as I was accomplishing all the things that I accomplished, I was certain that somebody was going to walk in the room at any moment and see through it and see like, oh, that's the poor girl that's not very smart. It took me all this time to figure out that those are not true anymore. I was not that I was ever not smart, but I was always trying to hide and always trying to fight my way through life.
Well, one of my mantras is for many of us, after we grow up and we start a career, we become actors.
Yeah.
We play a role. And some of us are, I became a geek that could speak. That's not who I am. I'm very introverted. I learned at Metropolitan Breakfast Club that I could work a room with the best. But by the way, it was exhausting. I was good at it. I got good at it. And I'd be interested in talking with you a year from now. Do people who know you now, will they look at you differently? Knowing what you have overcome to be the person you are today, that's pretty damn impressive.
Oh, thank you. I think people will look at me differently because because I share my story, people share their stories with me.
Yeah.
And there was recently someone shared a small piece of their story with me, and I look at them differently, with more awe and respect. I think that's one of the reasons why I like telling my story, because I want people to know how hard I worked. But honestly, the biggest reason that I am putting this book out there right now is because it's important for people to know and understand that you never know what someone has gone through. Everybody says you never know what someone's going through right now, and that's true. But the book illustrates also, you never know what one little kind gesture or comment, someone told me, like, I'm going to cry right now. I was just thinking about it. Somebody told me that I had pretty hair, and that moment will never, ever, ever go away because I felt so not pretty at that time and not loved even. And, people have opened up their homes to me, or all sorts of different things. So you never know what kind of impact you're going to make, even with just a smile or a little compliment. You also don't know how much strength our bodies and minds really have. We have so much resilience in there ready for us. And when we read novels, when we watch movies, one of the reasons that we're so connected to them is because as humans, we are heart-centered and we want to connect. We strive to connect with other people, and seeing and feeling their experiences helps us to realize we're not the only ones. It's like group therapy, but also to empathize and understand. And to know that there are, what feels to me, having experienced so much, it feels like a million different parallel universes in this country, and that are happening simultaneously. And all you have to do is look in somebody else's window, walk through their door, open your mind and heart to them, to walk into a completely different universe. And then if you open your heart and mind, maybe you can help them shift to another universe that's better. But we can't do that without sharing our own lives or being willing to see others.
Well, Steph, that's a great place to end this. If someone wanted to reach out and contact you and buy your book, how might they do that?
Well, it's going to be available on Amazon. So Anywhere USA is going to be on Amazon after September 5th. You can also find me at vine-collective.com, and you can find a little bit about the book or sign up for updates at vine-collective.com/book. I'm on Instagram and Facebook and LinkedIn. Stephanie Silver, Stephanie Mallory Silver, and Vine Brands. Because I have the company Vine Collective is my marketing and coaching business. And those are all the ways. You can also email me, ssilver@vine-collective.com.
And we'll put all of that in the show notes. And the important thing is when you get on Amazon, search for Steph Silver. And I'll let you figure out why.
And there's 2 Anywhere USAs. I forget what the other one is, but Anywhere USA, there's a green Ford truck on the cover.
So, Steph, thank you very much for being on the Repurpose Your Career podcast.
Thank you so much, Mark. I really appreciate the time.
I encourage you to pick up a copy. I found it a difficult read because I have known Steph for a long time. I hope you read it knowing that she comes out at the end whole and a great individual. Take a moment, go to careerpivot.com, sign up for the weekly Career Pivot Insights newsletter, which is sent out every Sunday. You'll get a weekly update on this podcast, white papers, and new blog posts. When you subscribe, you will receive my latest white paper, Ageism, the Last Acceptable Bias. While there, do not forget to check out the Career Pivot community, which can be found at careerpivot.com/community. Feel free to connect with me on LinkedIn. Thank you for listening all the way to the end of the Repurpose Your Career podcast. You will find all the show notes at careerpivot.com/episode-336. You can also subscribe to the podcast on Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Podbeam, Overcast, Spotify, Pandora, Amazon Music, and lots of other places where podcasts can be found. In fact, this podcast can be found on the Repurpose Your Career podcast channel on YouTube. Hope to see you next Monday for another episode of Repurpose Your Career podcast.